All right, we'll go to 1 Samuel chapter 2. Or no, sorry, I want y'all to go to Luke chapter 2. I'm going to start in 1 Samuel chapter 2. We're going to read 4 verses for the text verses tonight. And don't worry, that doesn't mean that the message is going to be extra long, but we got 4 different verses we're going to look at as the text, and then we'll jump into the message. Y'all start out in Luke chapter 2 because 3 of them are going to be right there around Luke 2. And then I'm going to start in 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 26. And there we read, "And the child Samuel grew on and was in favor both with the Lord and also with men." Okay, and then now let's go over to Luke. And if you're in chapter 2, just go a little bit above that to chapter 1 and verse number 80. "And the child grew and waxed strong in spirit, and was in the deserts till the day of his showing unto Israel." Now this is talking about John the Baptist. So the first one's talking about Samuel, now it's talking about John the Baptist. And then now let's go to Luke chapter 2 and verse number 40. Luke 2 and verse 40. "And the child grew and waxed strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him." And this, now it's talking about Jesus. And then all the way down to the end of Luke chapter 2, verse 52, again about Jesus, it says, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man." And so I want to bring a message tonight. I've titled it "In the Meantime." And it's what we should do for God when we're waiting, when it's in the meantime, in between the battles that we're fighting for the Lord, in between doing great things for God. Start out with a bit of an embarrassing story about myself. How many of y'all have done something that that was a bit of embarrassing, and and then you had to get up and tell everyone about it? Okay, so now I'm going to tell you about it. All right, about something I did embarrassing, or not recently, but a while back. You ever bragged about something you could do, but then when the time came to do it, you failed absolutely miserably? Yeah, I've done that. Done that many times, in fact. One time back when I was coaching basketball, the school I was coaching for, they decided one year they were going to have a free throw competition between the men that were in the various coaching positions in the school. And so they had us come in, we were going to do free throws. It was just a spur of the moment type of thing. We had maybe a week's notice, week and a half notice that they were going to do that. And I don't even remember why they were going to do it. Maybe they were trying to get more people in to watch the game or something, but just in between 2 of the games, they were going to have them do a free throw shootout. Well, I had spent the entire season and then the season before that teaching my players that the free throw is the most important shot in basketball. So I'm telling them over and over again, this is the most important shot. And I devoted a lot of time to teach them all the mechanics of the free throw shooting, how to do it properly, how to make more free throws. And I had also bragged to them because when I was in high school, I was a 75% free throw shooter on the line, which in high school, that was really good. In college, NBA, that's just mediocre. But in high school, 75% from the line, that was really good. And so I was the clutch shooter that the coach got the ball to at the end of the game when the other team starts fouling in order to stop the clock. And so they wanted the ball in my hands because I was going to make those free throws. That was my role. I wasn't very good at much other parts of the game, but I was good at shooting free throws. And so I had bragged about that and told them over and over again how I had won games from the free throw line. And then the day of the competition came, I stepped up to the foul line, had one of my players down under the goal. He was going to catch the rebounds, and of course, there weren't supposed to be any rebounds. They're all supposed to go straight through the net. But he was going to catch those and throw them back up to the top so that I could just keep shooting. The buzzer sounded. I went through my normal free throw routine, done it hundreds of thousands of times. Every single time, I do the exact same routine. I flip the ball out in front of me with a backspin. It bounces back. I catch it. I take 3 slow dribbles to get the motion in my arm that I'm going to do when I get to the shot. I bring the ball up. I go down, up, and through, and it's supposed to go straight through the net. And I missed everything. I didn't even hit the rim, didn't hit the backboard, nothing on that first shot. And it did not get much better from there. I ended up getting less than 30% of those shots after bragging about being a 75% free throw shooter all that time. And it was very humiliating, but it taught me something. Back in high school, when I was at 75% free throw shooter, I was not a natural shooter. The reason that I became good at free throws is because I shot a whole lot of free throws. Every single day after practice, so after everything we do in practice, after all the shots the coach made us take, I would go home and I would shoot a minimum of 100 free throws every single day. Saturdays, the other guys are out having fun. I'm at home, I'm shooting 100 free throws at a time, multiple times throughout the day. Sunday afternoon in between church services, I'm outside on my basketball goal shooting 100 free throws every single day. In season, in the off season, in the summer, every single day for 5 years, I shot 100 free throws a day. That's 182,500 free throws at least over that 5-year period. If you shoot 182,500 free throws, you'll be a pretty good free throw shooter. I can guarantee it. It's just because I kept practicing at it. Well, then I get out of high school, I get into college, I tore my ACL freshman year of college, and so I know what it's like, Hannah. So I didn't shoot any more free throws. I decided that's it, I'm done. I'm gonna focus on getting my work done, getting good grades in school, and I didn't go out and shoot 100 free throws every day. So all through college, I didn't do that. I started coaching. I think, it's important that I shoot free throws. I would shoot every now and then, just kind of stay fit and be able to show the guys how to do it. But I didn't shoot 100 free throws a day. I mean, why would I? I wasn't playing the games. My players were playing in the games. So why would I shoot 100 free throws a day? And then we come to that competition, and I find out, I should have been shooting 100 free throws a day. I would have looked a whole lot better in that competition if during that off period where I wasn't playing, I wasn't in the game, I wasn't competing, if I had kept practicing free throws, I would have done very good in that competition when the time came. And so in life, we go through seasons. There's going to be times in our lives when we're actively serving God in a task that requires us to be fully committed. Just like if I was playing in the games and playing on a team, I was fully committed. I had to shoot those free throws in order to fulfill my role in the game. Our text verses here look at Samuel, John the Baptist, and Jesus. They all had incredibly important ministries. Of course, Samuel's the great prophet, and he wrote a good portion of the Bible, had a very long ministry serving God, started out when he was very young, and he knew from the time that he was a very young child that he was going to serve God. But he didn't start right away. He didn't start serving God the moment his mother brought him to the temple. Now, yes, he did serve a little bit and cleaning up the temple, doing chores around the temple, but he wasn't in his full ministry then. And so he had a long period where he knew there's something important coming, and he had to do something in the meantime until that important time came. Same thing with John the Baptist. He knew from before, his parents knew before he was born that he was going to be the forerunner of Christ. And so he had a long, very important ministry ahead of him, but he had a long time to wait until it got here. And he was out in the deserts until he was 30 years old. And that's when he came back and started his ministry. So from the time he was a kid until the time he was 30, he knows this is coming, but he's got to do something in the meantime. And then the same thing is true of Jesus. Now, of course, being God, he knew from all eternity past what he was going to do. And of course, being God, he didn't do anything wrong, but he still had that time period from when he was born until the time that he was going to fulfill his ministry, starting around the age of 30. And if you remember, at the age of 12, he told his parents, wist ye not that I must be about my Father's business? And yet he didn't start right then. He went, he submitted to them, and he continued under them, waiting in the meantime. And when we think about them, we tend to think about all the things they did, all the exciting parts of their ministry, but how often do we think about what they did in that gap period, those slow times when they weren't serving God? And so these verses we looked at today tell us what they did. And so we're going to take Luke 2:52 as our outline and see what we also should be doing in the meantime, in between those periods of activity for God. So in Luke 2:52, let's read it once more. It says, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man." So there's 4 things that Jesus did. And I've heard lots of messages on this verse. They're always geared toward kids. All right, kids, as you're young, these are the 4 things you need to be doing to prepare for life. Well, it's not just for kids. as adults, these are the 4 areas we need to be focused on in between our periods of activity for God. So the first one is we need to prepare mentally. Jesus increased in wisdom. When God gives us those in-between times, we need to use them to sharpen our minds. Look at 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse number 13. And I hope you're ready to flip through, or you can look at them on the screen, but we're going to see a lot of Bible verses today. So in those in-between times, we need to be sharpening our minds. 1 Peter 1:13 says, "Wherefore gird up the loins of your mind. Be sober, and hope to the end for the grace that is to be brought unto you at the revelation of Jesus Christ." And it starts out, gird up the loins of your mind. And I'm sure many of you know what it means to gird up the loins. It's the men in that day, they wore robes, and when they're going into battle, you don't want a long flowing robe when you're about to go into battle because it's going to get in the way. You also don't want it when you're about to go to work. Kind of working in the fields, you don't want that robe getting in the way. So what they would do is they'd reach down, they'd grab the back part of the robe, they'd pull it up from in between their legs up in front, and they'd loop it through a girdle or a belt, and that would turn their robe into a pair of pants or shorts. And so that's what it's talking about. Gird up your loins, free up your legs so that you're ready to do the work. Well, when it says to gird up the loins of your mind, it means that we need to get ready and we need to prepare our minds for the action that's to come, so that we are not hindered by the ignorance that we have when God shows us what to do next. So our minds need to be sharp for whatever the next thing is that God calls us to do. Proverbs chapter 4 and verse number 7 says, "Wisdom is the principal thing." That means it's the most important. It's the number one thing. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. And then in Philippians chapter 3 and verse number 8, it says, "Yea, doubtless, and I count all things but loss, for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and to count them but dung, that I may win Christ." And verse number 10 says, "That I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, being made conformable unto his death." We look at those verses, and a lot of times we try to spiritualize these verses in Philippians. That when Paul says, "Yea, doubtless I count all things but loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ," we say, "Oh, well, that knowledge, that's just a deeper relationship with Christ." And well, that's true in a sense. We do need that deeper relationship with Christ, and that is what he was getting from it. But we don't need to ignore the plain word while we're looking at the spiritual application. The plain word there is knowledge. And then in verse 10 where he says that I may know him, it's not just that I may have a fellowship with him, have a relationship with him. No, I want to know him. That's mental. That's your mind. And so as we're going through these gap periods, these in-between times between when we're serving God in this one capacity, so like we got the missions conference coming up, and we just had the night in Bethlehem not too long ago. So we have an in-between time, in between those periods. We need to be focusing on sharpening our mind and increasing the knowledge of Christ. Something important that I see another area where we spiritualize a lot. Go to Luke chapter 10, and I want you to turn there and look at it in person instead of just looking at it on the screen. We'll put it up on the screen anyway, but Luke chapter number 10, and we'll go to the very end, verse number 41. Luke chapter 10, verse number 41. "And Jesus answered and said unto her, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things, but one thing is needful, and Mary hath chosen that good part, which shall not be taken away from her." And we know the story. Jesus has come to Mary and Martha's house, and he'd spent a lot of time there, and Martha is busy. She's getting things ready. She's preparing the food. She's getting the everything cleaned up, the table ready to eat. And she gets frustrated because Mary is over there sitting with Jesus and not taking part in everything. Well, go up a little bit, verse number 39. "And she had a sister called Mary, which also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word." And so we read this account, and it gets preached, and we're all talking about Mary is spending time with Jesus, and that's the important thing. Martha is out busy serving God, and while that's important, the more important thing is to spend time with Jesus. But it's not just that Mary was spending time with Jesus. It says in verse 39 that she sat at his feet and heard his word. She was working on her mind. She was getting that knowledge, that wisdom that Solomon told us is the principal thing. That's the number one thing, and Mary was doing that number one thing. And when you look at in verse 41 and 42, Jesus said at the beginning of verse 42, one thing is needful. Well, that's the exact same thing Solomon said. Wisdom is the principal thing. There's one thing that's the most important, and that's what Mary is doing. She's here hearing my word and filling her mind and gaining more knowledge about my word. And that's the one thing that we should focus on also. So when we get to those gap periods, those times in between, when we're in the meantime, we need to focus on increasing our knowledge. But what if we don't do that? What if we just say, okay, we're in the meantime, we're in between, I'm going to take a breath, I'm going to relax, I'm not going to study my Bible because we got another one coming up later, and I'll get started on that next event when it gets here, it'll be here soon enough. If we don't do that, if we do not increase our knowledge of God, there is a warning. Hosea chapter 4 and verse number 6, a verse that I quote a lot of times to myself, to other people. It says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject thee, that thou shalt be no priest to me. Seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy God, I will also forget thy children. There was one thing that was needful. Israel abandoned that one thing, and that's why they were destroyed. That is the number one reason that Israel was destroyed as a nation, both Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom. It was because they did not have the knowledge of God. They lacked knowledge. They did not keep their minds and their brains sharp and focused on God like they were supposed to. And God says, I'm going to forget your children because of that. I mean, as a dad, that's frightening to me. I don't want God to look at me and say, okay, you messed up, so therefore I'm going to forget your children. I'm not going to have anything to do with your son because you messed up. I mean, can you imagine God coming to you and telling you that? That's what he was telling Israel. You're not keeping your mind focused on me. You're not increasing your knowledge of me. So therefore, I'm going to forget your children. And it's not the only time that God said something like that. Isaiah 5:13 says, therefore my people are gone into captivity because they have no knowledge. Jeremiah 4:22, for my people is foolish. They have not known me. They are sottish children, and they have none understanding. They are wise to do evil, but to do good they have no knowledge. And then in Romans chapter 10, Paul talking about the nation of Israel, he said, for I bear them record that they have a zeal of God, but not according to knowledge. And so the reason that salvation didn't come first to the Jews, although, kind of first to the Jews, but the reason that it came to the Gentiles and then the Jews got zealous of the Gentiles, jealous of the Gentiles, and turned to salvation later, was that they did not have the knowledge that they were supposed to have of God. In that meantime, in that gap period between when God stopped speaking through the prophets, and then 500 or 400 years later, then Jesus comes on the scene, in that time, they forgot God. They did not maintain the knowledge that they were supposed to maintain. And it's interesting that it says they have a zeal of God. They were zealous for God. They wanted to do things for God, but they lacked knowledge, and knowledge was more important. And because of that, they were destroyed. Again, Philippians 1:9 and 10, Paul says, and this I pray that your love may abound yet more and more in knowledge and in all judgment. And I picked this verse out because there's a lot of preachers today that preach that all you have to do is love. Just love everyone and love this person and love that person, and we're all supposed to love each other. Well, that's not what the Bible says. The Bible says that your love is to abound yet more and more in knowledge. And so knowledge is the focus. It's the principal thing. The love is important, but the important thing is knowledge. We're not supposed to speak love in the truth. We're supposed to speak the truth in love. The truth is the important thing, that knowledge. And so in this in-between period, we're supposed to be gaining knowledge. And I'm going to skip a few things and go to the next one. So let's go to the next one, prepare physically. So the next thing that we read about Jesus is that he increased in wisdom and in stature. And so in this case, he's a little boy and he's growing up. So he's growing up in stature. For some of us, instead of growing up, we're growing out. And my wife lets me know that I'm growing out instead of growing up now. But it's still, stature is speaking of physical development. And it's something that's not talked about a lot in pulpits. I know many preachers that are grossly overweight, and they need to get out and pay attention to their body, but they say, well, I'm serving God. That's not an important thing. I need to be focused on the spiritual. But let's turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse number 27. It's a familiar verse, but hopefully we'll get a little bit more understanding of it. 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse number 27, Paul is writing and he says, but I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest that by any means when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. Now there's a lot packed into that you can see if you look at some of the Greek and look it up instead of just reading the English. But that first part there, I keep under my body, the word there is hupopiazo, and it literally means to hit under the eye, and to give someone a black eye is basically what it's talking about, to hit under the eye. But it was used in Greek, it was used as a metaphor to refer to a boxer who disciplines his body through hardship. Okay, so he's disciplining his body by taking all these blows from different people, and it gets his body in physical shape. So in other words, it means to exercise and to stay in shape. So Paul is saying, I exercise and keep myself in good physical shape. Why? I exercise and stay in physical shape, bring my body into subjection, lest that by any means when I have preached unto others, I myself should be a castaway. Now this is not talking about Robinson Crusoe and being cast away on a deserted island. This is talking about God saying, I can't use you, and throwing you away. And Paul is saying, if I don't keep my body in proper physical condition, God is just going to throw me away, and he's not going to use me. Now, it may be that God would still use him for something else, but God wouldn't have been able to use him for what he wanted him for. I mean, just think of what Paul went through. I mean, he's traveling all the time. He's, travel back then, it's not getting a car. A lot of it's walking, sometimes riding on a mule, but most of it's walking. And then sometimes on ships. He's shipwrecked, he's beaten lots of times, he's in prison, he goes through lots of periods in his life where he probably did not have very good food. If you imagine prisons back then, they didn't serve you the best food in prison. They didn't. It wasn't like today with Brother Joe could tell us about all the food they have to give to the men, and he was talking to William before he went back up to college about having to cater to like Muslims and Jews and their dietary requirements for their religion, and the prison catering to all that and make sure all the food is kosher for the Jewish inmates. And they didn't do that back then. You got whatever slop they happened to give to you, and many times those men went without food unless their families brought food to them. Jessica has told me a couple times, this is the way it is a lot of times in Japan. You don't have a lot of the petty crime in Japan because they don't feed the prisoners unless the family brings food to them. And so if you're a petty thief, you might go without food. And so you don't be a petty thief, you go out and get a job, and they don't have to worry about it. Maybe we should adopt that here, but that's what he's talking about. He's talking about in those times, or that's what he went through. He was going through things like that. He had to be physically fit to go through that. Now, none of us are going to have to do that, at least I hope. I hope none of us are going to have to be thrown in jail and go without food. Most likely, none of us are going to have to walk for miles and miles and miles at a time. But we don't know what God may require of us. God may ask us to build a building out here, and he may ask us to do it ourselves instead of paying a contractor to do it. Are we able to do that as men in the church? And I think right now we could all do that, but we need to be thinking about things like that. We don't know what's coming in the future, what physical things God's going to have for us to do. And in the time period where we're not serving God actively in some great, huge mission, we still need to keep our bodies in shape. Psalm 144 and verse number 1 This is David talking. He says, "Blessed be the Lord my strength," that's talking about physical strength, "which teacheth my hands to war and my fingers to fight." And we often think of David as a man that trusted God, and that's true. But he wasn't the kind of man that just trusted God to win the battles while he sat on the sideline eating Twinkies. David was a very, very, very strong man. He was the epitome of a physical specimen of a man. You have the tall, dark, and handsome. Well, he's tall because he's the same size as Saul, because he was going to use Saul's armor to fight Goliath, so he had to be the same size as Saul. So Saul was head and shoulders above everyone else. So that means David, even as a young man, he's head and shoulders above everyone else. He's a big guy. And then later on, he's fighting a giant toward the end of his life, and he's an old man now, and he's fighting a giant, and he struggles, and one of his mighty men has to come and save him as he's fighting a giant in the midst of this great, big, huge battle. And they told him, "That's it, David, you're never going to war again, because you couldn't feed a giant all by yourself anymore." And so that meant that before then, David was able to fight giants all by himself. He didn't have to have anyone help him go out and fight giants. And we're not talking about just with a sling and a stone. In this case, he's out there, sword to sword fighting this giant. And he had to have some help, and they said, "That's it, you're getting weak. You're no longer allowed to go out to battle at all." So David was a very, very strong man. And he did praise God for his strength, but he praised God for his strength talking about his physical strength. And he didn't get that physical strength just by a miracle like Samson did. He got that physical strength by going out and exercising, like Paul was talking about in 1 Corinthians. In fact, he was so strong, Psalm 18:34, David said, "He teacheth my hands to war, so that a bow of steel is broken by mine arms." And so he's strong enough, he can just take a bar of steel and just break it. I mean, he was a man's man. And so David was physically fit. He trusted God, and the way he trusted God to give him his strength is he followed the process that God designed for making men strong. And he trusted God's process so much that he could break that steel bar with his arms. The process God gave for men being strong is through exercise. You exercise, you work out your muscles, you work against resistance, and it makes you strong. It's a process that God gave us, and we're supposed to take advantage of it instead of just when a project comes and we're not strong enough to do it, then complaining, saying, "God, you didn't make me strong enough to do it." And no, he gave you the opportunity to exercise. You should have taken advantage of that opportunity so that you were physically fit. So when God gives us those in-between times, we should not just prepare ourselves mentally, but we need to prepare ourselves physically for whatever God may have for us in the future. We should never allow our bodies to prevent us from serving the Lord if we can help it. Now, I'll have to make a caveat here that this shouldn't discourage people that are incapable of certain physical activities. I mean, some people have handicaps and they can't go on and continue doing what they would have done if they hadn't had the handicap. For example, I played basketball once with a guy that had no hands, and he had grown up in a war-torn country with a civil war, and as a young kid, he had picked up a landmine and it had gone off in his hands, and so he no longer had hands, and his arms were cut off about right there. Great guy. He would hustle, play basketball. He could shoot with the nubs of his arms and still get the ball up there, and could dribble. But you know what he couldn't do? He could not spin the ball on one finger. So he didn't have the finger. And so other guys could spin the ball on one finger. I never could, but other guys could sit there and spin the ball on one finger and practice that and get good at it. Well, he couldn't do it. You know what? God would never ask that young man to spin the ball on one finger because he didn't have the fingers. God's not going to ask a one-armed man to juggle. God just doesn't give you things that you're physically incapable of doing and then ask you to do it unless he's going to do it for you. So I'm not saying that if you're in a condition or a situation where you can't be the specimen of physical perfection, that you have to get there anyway. God understands things, but we are to get better in the areas where we can. That young man that had no hands, he was active and staying physically fit in every area that he could. And so that's something that we need to do also. All right, number 3, we need to prepare spiritually. So Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, not because we don't need it, but because we all know it already. We all know that we're supposed to be growing closer to God spiritually at all times. James 4:8 says, "Draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, purify your hearts, ye double-minded." So we're to be drawing nigh to God. This is where that relationship comes into place. Before, when we talk about spiritualizing Paul's knowledge and saying that he's just getting a deeper relationship with God, well, here's where it is talking about that relationship. We're supposed to be drawing nigh and getting closer to God and growing spiritually. We need to be careful that we don't wander away from God in the easy times when we're not actively fighting battles. It's easy to stay close to God when everything's falling apart because you're praying to him all the time. But then when things start going well and it's a nice relaxing time period, you slack off on reading the Bible, you slack off on praying, and you fall away from God. Psalm 73:27 says, "For lo, they that are far from thee shall perish." So if you go far from God, there is a risk you're going to die. So we don't want that, so we want to stay close to God. Even in those easy times. John 15:4 says, "Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine, no more can ye, except ye abide in me." And then jump down to verse number 6. And it says, "If a man abide not in me, he is cast forth as a branch and is withered, and men gather them and cast them into the fire, and they are burned." Okay, so the branch does not bear fruit all the time. You can go out to any tree at all right now, and most likely that tree does not have fruit on the branches because it's not that season for it. The branch has seasons where it is struggling and bowed down under the weight of that fruit. And in the meantime, when it's not bearing fruit, in the winter, that branch still has to stay attached to the trunk of the tree, or it's going to wither and die, and it won't be able to bear fruit the next season. And so in the meantime in our life, we still need to stay attached to the vine. We still need to stay attached to Christ and continue to grow spiritually in Christ, even though it's not a time of heavy fruit bearing, heavy reaping. We still have to stay attached to the vine and continue to grow spiritually. All right, and so then the last one. So we have that Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God, and then the last one, in favor with men. Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Go ahead and turn there. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, we're going to look at several verses. God constantly brings people into our lives who can help us accomplish the work for him, but we have to do the work of maintaining those friendships so that we can take advantage of each other's strengths and weaknesses. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 9, I just sent this to William. Was it yesterday? Yeah, yesterday. He had mentioned something. There's a girl that he likes. He's trying to spend time with her. And he had mentioned, I just noticed she has this characteristic, and it's so different from me. And, supposedly he wasn't worried about it, but he's writing to us about it, so he's probably worried about it. that she has this characteristic that's different from a characteristic that he has. And so I sent him this verse, or this passage, Ecclesiastes 4, 9, and 12. It says, "Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him up. Again, if two lie together, then they have heat, but how can one be warm alone? And if one prevail against him, two shall withstand him. And a threefold cord is not quickly broken." And so this passage is talking about the two guys that are walking along together. And I mentioned to William that if they're both taking the exact same steps and they're walking identically to each other, if one falls, the other is going to fall. And so then neither one can pick them up. They have to be a little bit different. Even though they're walking together, they have to be a little bit different so that one can pick up the other one that fell. So just imagine you're walking along and there's a pit in the road, and one guy falls into the pit. Well, the other guy's standing over here, and so he doesn't fall into the pit, and he can reach down and lift the other one up. But if they're both walking in the same direction, the same exact spot, they fall into the pit. Now neither one can get out of the pit, and they both end up dying in the pit. So you have to have those differences among people in order to help each other. That's why God gave us those differences. The Bible says a man that hath friends must show himself friendly, meaning we have to take those differences and among our friends, and we are to still be friendly even though they're different from us, and we're to grow socially among each other. So this passage in Ecclesiastes, it's not talking about having friends that are just like us, but having friends that are different from us and still being friends with them. If you have a church and we come together in a church body, we're all different. 1 Corinthians chapter 12 talks about that. But now hath God set the members, every one of them, in the body as it hath pleased him. And if they were all one member, where were the body? So if we were all alike, if everyone is the hand, then you're not going to have anyone that's an eye and not going to have anyone that's a foot. And you can't do much when you're just a hand. Y'all remember that old horror movie with the, was it called The Hand or was it called The Thing? I think it's called The Thing. It was just a hand that walked around and killed people. Y'all don't remember that? Oh, y'all should watch it. It's a classic horror movie. But anyway, that's not going to happen. A hand is not going to do anything all by itself. You have to have the rest of the body for the hand to do something. But now there are many members, but yet but one body. And the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of thee, nor again the hand to the feet, I have no need of you. Nay, much more, those members of the body which seem to be more feeble are necessary, more abundant honor, are more necessary, and those members of the body which we think to be less honorable, upon these we bestow more abundant honor. And our uncomely parts have more abundant comeliness, for our comely parts have no need, but God hath tempered the body together, having given more abundant honor to that part which lacked, that there should be no schism in the body, but that the members should have the same care one for another. And whether one member suffer, all the members suffer with it. Or one member be honored, all the members rejoice with it. Now ye are the body of Christ, and members in particular. Okay, there at the end, that whether one member suffer, all the members suffer with it. If you cut your finger, you're going to ache all over. It's not just that little bitty spot where there's a cut that's going to ache. You know, your whole body is aching because you've cut your finger. If you break a leg, you're going to feel that all over. It's not just, Hannah, when you tore your ACL, that wasn't the only thing that felt bad in your body. The whole body feels bad when one part of the body gets injured. And then if you think of a different way, let's just go back to free throws. When I was shooting those free throws at 75% free throw shooting, people didn't come up to me and say, man, your hand is great. You've got a really good shooting hand. No one came and told me that. People would come and tell me, man, you're a good free throw shooter. The whole body got the glory for the work that this little hand did, rather than giving just the glory to the hand. So God gives every church a group of members with lots of differences between them. And if we're not careful, those differences can cause conflicts. And we'll say, you know, you're not doing this exactly the way I would do it, so therefore you're wrong. And the other person says, well, you're not doing that over there the way I would do it, so you're wrong. And so then we get those conflicts and button heads against each other. But our differences are not something to be feared. They're not a threat that we need to overcome. They are a gift from God to help us grow and accomplish more for Him. In that passage in 1 Corinthians 12, it says, but now hath God set the members, every one of them in the body. It's not God allowed these members to be there. No, God placed them there intentionally. God placed every member here at Journey Baptist Church intentionally. And we're supposed to take and see that intentional placement and take advantage from it. And that's how we're supposed to grow socially. And the best time to do that is in the off season, in the practice, not in the times where things depend on it, important things depend on it, but in those times where we're just in the meantime. That's when we're supposed to be developing those friendships, developing our reliance on each other. No sports team has ever shown up to the first day of practice and had perfect chemistry and coordination between all the members of the team. It just doesn't happen. I mean, even if you could take the best sports players in the world, say Team USA in the Olympics, these are supposedly the best basketball players in the world. And they show up and they play horrible at first until they learn to interact with each other. And they learn each other's strengths and weaknesses and learn how to fit and mesh with each other and coordinate with each other. Businesses are the same way. I talk to a lot of businesses now. Being in marketing, I'm talking to a lot of guys that own their own business. And businesses are like that sports team. You bring in new employees, they can be the best employees in the world, they can have the greatest resumes, and you bring them in, sit them down, tell them to work, and they're not going to work well together. I mean, each one can be the best in their field, and they're still not going to work well together until they've had time to develop that teamwork and learn each other and learn what their strengths and weaknesses are and how they can help each other. The same thing is true of churches. We've got new members that come in. We're going to have to learn how to work with each other and learn what each other's strengths are so that we can help each other and continue building our team, our church here, so that we can serve God properly. So we have those 4 areas that we're supposed to be focused on in the meantime. When we're in between those times of active service for God, we should be focusing on preparing mentally, preparing physically, preparing spiritually, and preparing socially. And when we do all that, and we work all those areas together, and everyone's doing that together, there's no limit to what we can do as a church. I remember the first time that my high school team defeated our rival team on their home court. We had defeated them once before on our home court, but that's not quite the same. So we were in their territory and we defeated them on their own court. And we had prepared for weeks preparing for them. We knew who their best players were, who their best shooters, their best ball handlers. We had scouted out, we knew what plays they were going to run, what they were most likely to call when we ran a particular defense, how they would react to it. We had studied them, we had practiced. Everyone on the team was working hard toward that goal, toward the goal of defeating them. Previous times, we would say, hey, this team's coming up, and people would say, okay, yeah, they're coming up. And they wouldn't prepare ahead of time for the possibility of playing against that team. And we never defeated them on their home court prior to this, after several years of playing against them. And so now, this time, we had all done the work, we had all prepared, every single one of us was ready. And even the guy that was the worst player on the team, I mean, he was uncoordinated as could be. The guy couldn't make a bucket if his life depended on him. He made a shot in that game. And excuse me, the whole gym just erupted in cheers when he made his shot. But it was because we all got together as a team and we all prepared for it in that time in between the previous game and that game. And so as a church, we need to do the same thing. We need to prepare mentally, prepare physically, prepare spiritually, and prepare socially. So thank you, and Pastor, I'll turn it back over to you.